Can you guys see my screen?
Yeah.
Great.
Yes.
Good
Yes.
afternoon, everyone. Let's all remain on mute. I will be tracking everybody. Hello. Good afternoon, everyone. Glad you're here. We're just going to take a couple seconds and admit more folks. So glad you're with us today. Hopefully, you're returning from yesterday, but if you're not, welcome. Okay. Well, I want to just get us started. We'll have some more folks slowly coming in, but today is the second and final day of our webinar series focusing on harm to healing, trauma-informed responses to domestic violence. So I just want to give a few announcements, questions that might come up throughout the session. We'll keep track in the chat. Myself or Lacey will be responding. So we are going to record this event. It should be recording right now, hopefully. The speaker has provided some resource documents from yesterday, and we'll have some takeaway information after today's session to share out. The slides will not be shared, but we hope to have those takeaway and resource documents shared with everybody along with the recording shortly after today's session. We ask that you please remain on mute. Sometimes when you join, it can be finicky and it brings you off mute. So just make sure you're muted. I'm also going to be on standby to make sure folks stay on mute just for the sake of allowing our presenter to go through her content, and then questions can be asked throughout the presentation in the chat, and I will return to those questions at the end, and we will get those answered for you. Last but certainly not least, I really want to encourage you to take care of yourself. Yesterday was a wonderful space of encouragement and learning, and a lot of great discussion in the chat. So please do that. But also stretch your body, drink your water, take a break if you need it. We're here for 90 minutes. Hopefully you can attend the entire 90 minutes. So with that being said, I'm just going to introduce myself quickly and then pass it over to Lacey Wind. But my name is Chelsea Bellin. I use she, her pronouns. I'm an enrolled member of the Yankton Sioux tribe from South Dakota, but I was born and raised on the Colville Indian Reservation in Washington State, which is where I reside now. I am the program manager at NIHB in the tribal health programs, and I'm just really excited to be in space with you, learn from Whitney today, and be available for connecting after today's session, learning about the work that you do. So my information will also be shared. But at this time, I'll pass it over to Lacey Wind to introduce herself and kind of set us up for a good space today.
Good afternoon, everybody. I'm excited to join today and for all of you to be here with us. As Chelsea said, I am Lacey Wind. I am an enrolled member of the Northern Cheyenne Nation. I'm located actually in DC, but I'm here home on a reservation for the summer, which I'm very excited to be. So I am the Vice President of Tribal Health Programs here at NIHB. And for you all yesterday that already heard about NIHB, I'm actually going to quiz you to make sure that you were listening. I'm just teasing. So if you don't know what we do at NIHB, and if you've been new, welcome. The National Indian Health Board serves all 575 federally recognized tribal nations. We support tribal health by building capacity and delivering national programming, training, technical assistance, policy, and partnership that reflects the priority of tribal nations. Everything we do is grounded in tribal sovereignty and guided by the direction of tribal leaders. So again, it's great to see all of you here today. And anybody that missed yesterday, you missed a great presentation. but we are glad that you joined today for Whitney. Yesterday's speakers were Whitney Novald and Shelby Bergenson, and they created really a beautiful space for learning, and we're really excited to welcome back Whitney today. Before we begin the session, I'd like to reflect on a few takeaways from yesterday's gathering. We heard from Whitney and Shelby about how domestic violence is often rooted in patterns of power and control, not just physical violence, and how to recognize these patterns early creates the opportunities for prevention and support. One great thing that I think that we all learned was the importance of shifting our perspectives from asking, why didn't they leave, to what happened? So we can really respond in an understanding instead of judgment. So I think that was a beautiful takeaway. If you didn't get anything from the presentation, I think those questions were wonderful. So we recognize that all Indigenous communities, cultures, families, and communities can both be impacted by abuse and serve as powerful sources of healing. As we continue today's conversation, I invite you to keep those lessons in mind and think about how each of us can help create space that promotes safety, dignity, and healing for the survivors and families. I will pass it on to Whitney to introduce herself in her way, and we are excited for today. Thanks, everyone.
Oh, I'm unmuted already. Okay. Good afternoon. I almost said good morning. My morning flew by so quickly. I'm Whitney Nordvold. I'm going to try to share my screen. Where's my mouse? Oh, there we are. Okay. Sorry, I did that backwards. Need to click the share button first. There we go. Bear with me, guys. Sorry. Did it go, Chelsea? Oh, there we go.
I do not
And
see
there we
your
go.
slides yet.
Is it up now? Oh, there it goes.
Yep, it's loading.
Okay. Okay. Well, I just want to welcome everybody back, and I hope that everyone got something valuable yesterday that was able to be here. I'm wondering, and if you can drop in the chat anybody who's new today, like wasn't here yesterday, just say new or something like that, so that I can get an idea of like how many. Okay, there's quite a few of you. Okay. Okay, there's lots of you here today. Okay, that weren't here yesterday. So I don't want to spend too much time reviewing what we talked about yesterday. And I think that today's presentation could stand on its own, but I think it's good to just kind of touch on what we talked about yesterday. I'll introduce myself in just a second. But the name of today's presentation is Restoring Safety, Connection, and Spirit After Domestic Violence. But it should say like before and after, like to prevent, but also heal post. So we're gonna start up with individual healing today and move into community transformation. And our first webinar, we focused on sort of recognizing domestic violence through a trauma-informed lens, not just with those obvious indicators. We talked about coercive control, the impact of trauma on the brain and the nervous system, the relationships of all of those involved, and the importance of recognizing abuse before it escalates to crisis. And Shelby shared some extremely valuable information about advocacy, safety planning, legal protections, what shelters might be like. And I think one of the really important things that Shelby shared that we all, really want to keep in mind is connect with your local resources. So if you have a shelter locally, get to know them, know their names, know what that intake process looks like, and know of any other resources that are not an individual moving into the shelter, because Shelby shared the value of so many other resources, just individual education and relationship and allyship with people who might need support outside of, you know, a place to live or food to eat or clothes to wear and those kinds of things. So today we're going to kind of build on that foundation, and we're going to talk about what happens after some safety is established, and what are some ways that we can prevent harm and heal after harm. And we're going to talk about one of my favorite topics is neuroscience and the biology of safety. We're going to talk about some characteristics of healthy, emotionally mature relationships. We spend a lot of time in this, domestic violence conversation talking about what is violence, what do we want to prevent, what do we want to eliminate. But I feel like in order to have a major long-term change, we need to spend just as much or more time talking about and promoting healthy relationships. So we're going to talk about what that looks like today. And we're going to zoom out of the individual a little bit more. And we're going to talk about how families, organizations, and communities impact, shape, and support relationship health. And unfortunately, my presentation is going to feel like it's kind of cutting off at the end slide wise, because I got this really beautiful aha moment early this morning and late in the evening yesterday. And I told Chelsea, I'll just inform you all, I have ADHD. So if we go on some rabbit trails, just go with me. We're gonna get to the point at some point, but I don't know how, but I forgot that I used to work in public health. I used to work for the Great Plains Tribal Chairman's Health Board. And I was thinking about what it looks like. You know, we had lots of questions at the end of yesterday. How do I apply this? Like, this is really great information. Thank you for this education. But now, how do I make this happen? This change happen in my community. And I got to thinking about how PSE, policy, system, and environmental strategies, are really, really common in conversation in public health. But as a mental health provider, we don't hear that conversation as often. So that's kind of where we're going to end in our conversation today. And that sort of takes me to my introduction and talking about why this work is so important to me, and kind of where my perspectives come from. So I'm Whitney Nordvold. I am Sicangu Lakota of the Lower Brule Sioux Tribe. I live in South Dakota, right in the middle. I live in Pierre, our capital. And I have an office here, and I have an office in Lower Brule where I offer individual trauma, primarily trauma work. I work with people of all different kinds of symptoms and lives. And I think my youngest client has been maybe 5, and my oldest has been in their 70s. I do marriage work at this time, because I have so many of my own little kids and only have so much capacity for the littles. I only work with adolescents and up. And I specialize in trauma recovery, nervous system healing, and body-based healing modalities. I work with a lot of domestic violence survivors, narcissistic relationship survivors, and that's not necessarily only romantic relationships. There are a lot of young people, adults that used to be children who were raised by narcissistic parents. And so I do a lot of that kind of work too. I have extensive training in historical and generational trauma healing. and have tailored all of my academics to working with Indigenous individuals. And I don't say any of that to say, look what I did. The reason I'm telling you this is because I have a broad understanding of what trauma looks like from a personal perspective as a domestic violence survivor, the daughter and granddaughter of domestic violence survivors. And I have many relatives who are domestic and sexual violence survivors as well. When I first graduated with my bachelor's, I went into community development and I worked in community development. And then that kind of took me to higher education, which kind of took me to, at some point I worked in early childhood development. And then I ended up at the Tribal Chairman's Health Board working in chronic disease prevention and all of these kind of downstream interventions. And I just kept finding that people aren't ready for this. People aren't ready for this programmatic work. And eventually made my way to working with the individual in trauma. And now it's really cool because I'm kind of circling back around and learning to use all the skills I used in all these other areas by applying a trauma-informed framework and teaching others to do that through training and teaching and workshops and conferences and retreats and doing individual organizational education. So that's me. And that's the perspectives from which I'm bringing the information today. Okay. So my hope today is to support everybody to be able to have some kind of a general answer to the question, how do I take this information and this knowledge about how to, what is trauma and how do I prevent it and how do I help heal it into their work? So I want everybody to be able to walk away from today with some actionable step. So I think it's really, really important. I think this is the academic in me that thinks it's really important to have a shared understanding and have common definitions whenever we're talking about things. I know from working with individuals that I might say one thing and feel one way and describe things. Oh yeah, I sure can. Can you hear me better now? Sorry, I think it's really important that we have, you know, common or shared language, because when I'm working with individuals, I can say one thing and it's really easy for me to sometimes offend somebody by using one form of language and they think it means something else. So we're going to define domestic violence as a pattern of coercive control in which one person uses behaviors to gain and maintain power over another. Sorry, I was told to put my phone on Do Not Disturb by Chelsea, and I never did. So now I just did that. Trauma, I think that a lot of people think of trauma as an event that happened. And trauma is actually the result of an event that happened. It's the biological nervous system response to an event. So it's the lasting impact overwhelming experiences have on the brain, body, relationships, and sense of safety. We can have something bad happen and it not be trauma. We can have something that one person perceives as not a big deal and it can result in trauma. We can have two people experience the exact same thing. One person ends up with a trauma response, and another person ends up saying, man, that sucked. I never have to do that again. And then they just move on with their life. And we're going to talk in a minute about what is trauma in the body and sort of what are the differences between those two things. And I apologize if you already know these things, but I want to make sure that we understand what we're talking about. Trauma informed is, a buzzword, I think, in today's spaces. And so I want to make sure we know that that means recognizing the widespread impact of trauma and being intentional to respond in ways that promote safety, trust, choice, collaboration, and empowerment while actively working to avoid re-traumatization. So sometimes help can be harm. And I know that sounds like crazy, but sometimes we rush in and we can create chaos where we're really trying to help. And so when we're trauma informed, we're moving into a space of healing where we are being very intentional and we are being very, on purpose with the way that we're interacting with the situation, creating curiosity without making sure that the person feels like they're not being re-traumatized by having to bring up the situation. Okay, so healing. What is healing? That's another one. That's kind of a loaded definition. Everybody has kind of a different idea of healing. And I would love for everybody to think about, while I'm saying the definition we're using today, about their own definition of healing. Healing is the ongoing process of restoring what experiences of harm disrupted. It's the ongoing process. So that's one thing I want to keep in mind, that this idea of healed, when we're talking about emotions, and I can have a healed bone, right? A broken arm. But when we're talking about environments, communities, and emotional healing, it is an ongoing process of restoration. So we're restoring voice, we're restoring choice, power, connection, identity, dignity, hope. Thank you for sharing in the chat. It means so much to me. I really do better when I'm teaching in conversation. And so when I'm feel like I'm just a floating head over here by myself, it helps me to have those reactions and responses. So we sometimes think of healing as getting over it or moving on or returning to the person we were before. But we need to remember that healing isn't about pretending that something didn't happen or making the experience of it disappear. It's about the restoration and maybe the increased normalization or capacity to be in a rested state. Okay. Just looking at my notes, these quiet moments are for you to reflect and for me to make sure I didn't miss anything. So we just kind of went over this and I'm repeating it for a reason. What does healing actually mean? It means more than surviving. It means more than leaving in these domestic violence situations. When somebody gets out, that's just actually, it's not even the first step. For some people, it's the first step, but for others, it's the fifth or the sixth or the seventh or the eighth step. They may have had to prepare for months before they actually leave. So the process of healing is the process of restoration or returning to self or creating a new normal. Experiences of domestic violence and other forms of trauma can profoundly disrupt the way people experience themselves, the world, and relationships. And because many people are questioning their own voice and their own value, their sense of choice becomes smaller. And so when we are coming from a trauma-informed space and a trauma-informed place, there's a healthy sense of agency and choice that we are helping that person to be restored to. And in this conversation, guys, we're not just talking about domestic violence. We're talking about the expansive reality of generational and systemic and intergenerational and historical trauma that is the reality in our Native communities, in our Native organizations, on and off reservation. So this conversation is really tying back to domestic violence over and over again. But what I'm going to be sharing today is something that you can apply to any organization, any community that you are trying to grow to be a healing space, a restorative space. So we want to make sure that we are restoring sense of safety, voice and self-expression, choice and autonomy, healthy power and agency. It can be easy to go to the opposite end, right? We see that all the time where people who have had a really harmful experience where they have felt like a prisoner to their experience, and then they go to the opposite where they over control. So that's why that's healthy power and agency. Opportunities for trust and connection, identity, dignity, and hope. We need to remind people that they matter, their voice matters, that they have choice, that they deserve dignity, that they belong, that they're safe, and that there's hope. And I want to invite you to keep these ideas in mind throughout the presentation, because I think trauma-informed interaction has the potential to restore so much more than just those recovering from domestic violence. It has the opportunity to help us restore our communities to a more traditional and healthy value system, which was disrupted by the harm of colonization. Okay, we're gonna get into one of my most favorite topics, guys. I absolutely love talking about the science of safety. I think that there is so much shame and guilt that come with the experience of trauma that we can feel, because we don't know what's going on inside of ourselves. We can feel like I'm the problem, something's wrong with me. The reason why this is happening, or I made these choices, or I behaved the way I did, or the reason I'm so irritated, or I'm so tired, or my body is so sick, or whatever, is because I'm bad. And for me personally, when I had the opportunity and the beauty of understanding my body, and that so much of these things that we call symptoms in our world, or even things that we define as negative personality traits or whatever, things that we use to diagnose people as clinicians, are actually somebody doing their very, very best to survive. And so when our nervous systems are constantly asking, am I safe? Okay, so a healthy nervous system is constantly asking, am I safe? And a traumatized nervous system is constantly saying, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. It's not asking anymore. So safety isn't simply the absence of danger, it's a full experience. And when we are experiencing safety, we can connect, we can think clearly, we can learn, we can trust, we can heal. And if our nervous system is detecting danger, survival takes priority. I want to know if anybody's familiar with the I can't even remember what it's called. I'm so sorry. But there is this way of understanding the brain. It's like called the fist, something about a fist. Okay, I'm not asking the question very well, so nobody's going to be able to answer it. I'm just going to show it to you. Okay, so our brain has like 3 major parts, okay? And the thumb is where our safety and survival and emotional brain functions happen. And our prefrontal cortex up here is where all of our executive functioning, our curiosity, our logic exists. Okay. This is where we learn and we think clearly and we can trust and have functional conversations with people. Now, when something happens that says, I'm not safe, it's called flipping your lid. So you don't have access to that prefrontal cortex anymore. And I'm so sorry for everybody who already knows this, but when that happens, our survival brain, fight, flight, freeze, emotions, protectiveness, defensiveness is running the show. And so when we're coming to places as an individual, and we're going to get to what this looks like systematically, but as an individual, when we're coming to interactions with people in especially, healthcare, public spaces, social services, as an advocate, it is so important that thank you, the hand model. Thank you very much. It's so important that we keep our tone in mind, our facial expressions in mind, because we're constantly scanning for safety. That's just what our nervous system is doing all the time. And if we're dealing with somebody who's hypervigilant to those things, anything that they can perceive as a threat, it's likely that they will. And in order to create healing in our communities, we need to make sure that the people around us are repeatedly experiencing safety. Healing requires repeated experiences of safety. The body's like, oh, I'm safe, prove it. Prove it, prove it. I don't believe it. I have enough experiences where people who care about me, who are supposed to be protecting me, somebody who says they love me, hurt me. So they don't even have to be conscious of it. Their nervous system, which is in charge of keeping them alive, is like, prove it to everyone, okay? All right. So, get a drink here while you all think about that. Can you give me a reaction or a response if you're familiar with? Just give me like a thumbs up. How many people are even here, Chelsea? I can't even tell. I don't know how many responses are.
Yeah, there's 137 people total, including us.
Okay. I said polyvagal theory. Okay, yeah, so lots of us are. So I'll try not to spend too much time on it. I have a feeling there will be some good conversation and questions about application at the end. So hopefully we'll have some extra time for that then. So one of the most important things that we've learned from neuroscience is that our nervous system, like I said, is constantly asking, am I safe? And polyvagal theory is just that, everyone. We need to keep in mind it can be a little controversial because some people teach this like it's absolute fact. And at this point, polyvagal theory is a theory. But it is a framework that makes really good sense in observable interactions. So while we don't necessarily have this nailed down as fact, science-wise, it is a really great framework to describe what we can observe, in behavior in people. So it attempts to explain the biological experience of trauma and safety. So as our bodies are automatically scanning our environment for safety, if we look at this through the lens of coercive control or violence or emotional abuse, like I said, it's not just, am I safe? It's like, I'm not safe, I'm not safe, I'm not safe. And there are parts of our brain that teach us to view our world. It's called the reticular activation system, and part of its job is to help our body reinforce our beliefs. And so if we believe we're not safe, we're going to be viewing the world through a perspective that reinforces that. And I want people to understand that all of these are important. A flexible nervous system is a healthy nervous system, but when we're looking at domestic violence survivors and people who have experienced extensive harm over time, they have a really, really hard time experiencing flexibility. And in the nervous system, trauma is when we get stuck in that sympathetic fight, flight, freeze response. Or we can see it as shut down. So I want to strongly encourage everybody here, if you're not familiar with it, and I can, maybe I can send it to you, Chelsea. There's a PDF by Deb Dana, and she has an exercise. She has an exercise that she walks people through. You can look on her website. You can find an exercise that walks you through it on YouTube for free. You just look Deb Dana ladder exercise, and she helps you identify what it feels like for you to be in ventral vagal, which is a engaged and secure state. I feel okay. I have the ability to be curious. The biological parts that come with this is healthy digestion. My immune system does its job. I'm able to respond warmly and curiously. Well, if I sense a threat, I'm going to move into sympathetic. This means I'm on guard. I need to be ready to protect myself. We need this part of our body. This is us protecting ourselves. The problem is when we have spent enough time there being threatened, we get stuck there. And we can only stay there for so long, and our body may force us into dorsal, which is a shutdown state. And some people, this is their natural response. This is their kind of go-to. And so we need to keep that in mind, but also somebody who is in a dorsal response has probably been experiencing a trauma response for a long time and their nervous system is exhausted. From a provider's perspective, I see dorsal as a depression response and I see anxiety as a sympathetic response. I have not worked with a single person who doesn't have both. So if somebody comes in and they are describing depression symptoms, it's likely they also have anxious symptoms because the system has to go back and back and back and back and back and, back and forth in order to survive. So I'm saying all of that just so that we can have a picture of our own experience in the world as humans, and then also what it looks like when we have somebody in front of us, what's going on inside them. If you take nothing from today, besides this slide, I will have done my job, my personal convicted job. The most valuable healing tool that all of you have is you. I'm being quiet for a purpose. I want you to really think about that. You're here because you care. You're here because you have a sphere of influence. You're here because you're a community leader. You're here because you are convicted to help. You're a helper or you wouldn't be here. The most valuable healing tool is you. And trauma-informed care isn't just something we do, it's how we show up in the world. And it's pretty darn hard to help and support somebody if you haven't done your own work. Sorry, not sorry. Our nervous systems are constantly communicating with the nervous systems of the people around us, regardless of whether or not we are aware of it. I'm sure everybody's, said or heard like, oh man, it feels stuffy in here, like personality, the personality of the room, like you can cut the tension with a knife kind of thing. Like that's not just because everyone has that ability to do that, to sense what's going on around them. And that's because our nervous systems are communicating with each other at all times and we're picking up on nuances. We cannot consistently create safety if we have not learned how to cultivate it in ourselves. Self-awareness and regulation are essential, not perfection. So I'm not asking anybody to get it right all the time. I'm not encouraging you to be perfect at all, but I am encouraging you to lean into being able to, be calm, be present, understand your own triggers. Your triggers are not somebody else's responsibility. They're your responsibility. And I think in Native communities, the secretary who answers the phone needs to be trauma informed. The person who's checking us out at the grocery store needs to be trauma informed. If you're working in any capacity with Indigenous people, you are dealing with some form of a traumatized nervous system, regardless of how much work that person has done individually or not, or regardless of their experiences or not. The amount of struggle that we witness as even the peer of a traumatized person is exponentially increased by being an Indigenous person or working in an Indigenous community. And I'm not saying this to be hopeless. I'm saying this because that means that we have the ability to change it. Like this sounds like it's not a powerful thing. It sounds like, oh, we're this victim to all these things. No, like if we have the ability to be influenced by harm so extensively, then we have the ability to heal and revitalize so extensively. But that healing starts with you. If you're going to be supporting and hoping to improve the lives of others. So we have to be emotionally available. We have to set aside defensiveness. People experience us before they process anything that we're saying, no matter how much we like it or not. And so we have to be aware of where we are in our own healing journey. Okay, next. This is kind of what I just, was saying. Healing happens in relationships. Trauma can occur in relationships, but healing also happens in relationship. And so healthy relationships are characterized by repeated experiences of safety, trust, respect, consistency, accountability, healthy boundaries, repair after conflict. This is a huge one. This one is harder, so much harder, it seems, for people than, so many of these other things. Having to admit that you were wrong and you wish you had chosen differently. Promoting and experiencing belonging. Human beings are wired for connection. So that survival brain is also the emotional brain, right? And so the two most influential automatic responses are to stay connected for survival and to protect for survival. So relationships that are healthy are characterized by shared power, mutual respect, emotional maturity, curiosity over, as in above, control, connection without losing identity. So people get to be individuals. They get to be experience autonomy in relationship. And in a healthy relationship, both people are both people are encouraged to grow. And, I noted this yesterday and I'm noting this today. This is not just true for romantic relationships. This is true in, parent-child relationships. This is true in school systems, employment systems, siblings, all of the above. And this is really important that we keep in mind that healthy relationships aren't just the absence of abuse or the absence of harm. Okay. And that takes me kind of to how do we zoom out a little bit? Where do we learn how to be in relationships? I would love folks to drop in the comments whatever response comes to your mind. Who teaches us love? Who teaches us conflict? Who teaches us respect, boundaries, power, belonging? Yeah, so there's a lot of family here. Yeah, absolutely. Teachers, mentors, society, culture, family first. Yeah. Media, yes. So who teaches a child what love looks like? Who teaches them how to handle conflict? Who teaches them whether or not their voice matters? who teaches us what respect looks like or what's important. Yeah. And it's really easy to, so I would say the most influential early on is our caregiver, caregivers, parents primarily, if we have the privilege of being with our parents. But because our, for Lakota, we call that our tioshpae, our closest family, our closest people, those kinship norms are now interrupted. And as a result, there's a lot more system influence and a lot more beyond community influence that is influencing our young people, and then also our adults. We think about, what do we learn in our first workplaces or in school, or I think about the expectations I learned in my first professional job and how that kind of set the tone for expectations for every other professional experience after that. I had the privilege of being supervised by somebody who was really full of integrity. And when I worked in places that didn't align with the bar that person set for me professionally, I was aware and uncomfortable and either called it out or got away from it. And so there's so many, and I was an adult, I was in my 20s by the time I took the long route through college, and I graduated with my bachelor's after having 2 kids, and I was like 25, I think, or something like that. So, that my first professional position was in adulthood, and I learned so much from that. So that's why this next slide exists. So if we go to the next, beyond individual healing to community healing or organizational healing or systemic healing, we have to look at the concepts of policy, systems, and environments. Okay, I was really excited when my brain made this connection. We're here with these public health folks. Who's familiar with the concept of PSE strategies? Give me a thumbs up or a thumbs down if you're not. Yeah, so I spent several years working in chronic disease prevention, and I was able to marry my community development skills with chronic disease prevention and community health promotion. And during that time, I was introduced to the concept of policy, systems, and environments. And this next slide is going to describe it a little bit more, but my point is if communities teach relationships, communities can also strengthen relationship health. So this is bigger and broader than the work that I do with myself, which is important and valuable. Holding individuals accountable is important and valuable, but how do we make a broad stroke to change? How do we prevent the next generation from creating these same habits? Well, one, we start with ourselves. We start with the individual. But in order to create sustainability, we have to shift the entire system. And I genuinely don't have the specific answer for your community. So not that you would expect me to have that expertise, but I'm just being super humble here. The reality of PSE strategies, in my experience of working for the Tribal Chairman's Health Board, was we worked with individual communities to implement policy, system and environmental changes in their own communities. So this concept is often used in chronic health conditions, smoking, healthy eating, creating decisions, easy to make decisions that promote healthy behaviors. So we're editing policies that impact broader systems. And we're not just talking about political policies here. We're talking about employment policies, training requirements, systems where we are allowed to have a mental health day. Systems where when we lose a loved one, we don't have to explain why we're taking 2 weeks off. That's built into the system, right? When we have a system or a policy that says, if you are a domestic violence, if you're charged with domestic violence criminally, to work for us, we require you to go through this programming, or we will pay for your counseling, or, I'm just giving examples of what this might look like in real life. And then the environment, we're talking about physical influences, economic influences, social influences that make it easier to make the healthy choice and harder to make the harmful choice. Just gonna look at my notes here. I feel like I'm forgetting something, but like I said, it's probably gonna be all over a little bit. So instead of like with, chronic disease prevention, we are talking about what kinds of things can we apply that help people to eat healthy or stay physically active, or, any of those kinds of things. But on this other side, what we're wanting to ask for, domestic violence prevention, healthy relationship promotion. We want to create conditions where healthy relationships grow. So that means like we don't tolerate bullying. We don't tolerate gossip. We don't, those kinds of things. We need to have environmental and policy expectations for healthy relationships, romantically and beyond. If we think about behavioral support the same way we think about chronic disease prevention in this kind of policies and systems way, we're asking, what can we do to help survivors heal? How can we hold harmful individuals who are deeply harmed individuals? How can we restore them? How can we hold them accountable and restore them? What policies can we make that restore dignity to somebody who is a victim, who is a survivor? What organizational systems and policies can create increase of choice and voice instead of unintentionally creating power? So public health has given us this great framework, so we don't have to invent something new. It already exists. So when we look at kind of the traditional approach of, preventing domestic harm, it's like individual, education, awareness, intervention, treatment. And all of those things fit into the PSE strategy, but they all are separate outside of the policy system and environment framework. So what we want to do is find ways to work within systems that already exist instead of trying to create something new altogether. And I want to just give an example of what that might look like. And we still have, quite a bit of time for questions, but I just want to encourage you all to think, whether you're here as an individual, whether you're here as an organization leader, a program manager, somebody who works with individuals, an advocate. What does this look like for you? What does this look like for the system you exist in? What does this look like in your community, in your household? What does this look like in your family? So when I did this with chronic disease prevention, what we did was I'll just say how I did it. I worked with a couple individual communities, and I went around and found folks who cared about chronic disease prevention. We learned yesterday that there are lots of different kinds of organizations and lots of different kinds of community individuals and programs that care about this, because we're all so deeply impacted by domestic violence. And so if you can find a group of people who really care about this and start creating a conversation, that was really kind of, at the end when Shelby was talking about we're better in numbers, we're stronger together. Find others who are passionate about this as well. And what we did was we created a community wellness coalition. So this would be, something a little bit different. And we created intentional conversations around what are the needs in our communities. And we actually ended up doing a community needs assessment. And we worked with children, families, organizations to create an understanding around what was missing by these identified issues within chronic disease prevention. Well, we would just apply this framework to domestic violence. So what are the areas where we don't have opportunities where it's easier to choose the healthy behavioral choice, or it's easier to go for help? Where are the pitfalls? Where are the challenges? Where are the strengths? Find out who does it well, find out who's struggling. And then we created a work plan, and we got to work and we applied it. The beauty of this kind of behavioral framework is a lot of it doesn't take creating something new. You don't need a playground to have a healthier relationship. You don't need a healthy vending machine to make it easier to choose kindness or respect. So it's not like it's costing money in tangible items, but it's about creating education and informing leaders and creating noise and accountability for your community. I want to be really intentional by saying, if this is going to be sustainable, every community is going to have to do it for themselves. You're going to have to find leaders and people who are invested in your community in order for it to change, in order for it to grow. So, you know, if we want somebody to be physically active, we're going to give more trails. We're going to do all these other things so that they can choose physical activity. I'm wondering if anybody can come up with, off the top of their head, what would you like to see in your workplace, in your community, in your school, that would make it easier for the people you love and care about, your constituents, your community members, your patients? What would make it easier for them to choose behavioral and emotional health? Okay. So education is an extremely valuable piece. Consistent town meetings. Yeah. Cost analysis. Yes. Yeah. Coping skills for children. Yeah. The earlier we start, the better. Absolutely. Yeah. Making children aware of things that can support them. Increased regulation on social media. Increased transparency. Traditional values and principles of appropriate behaviors. Absolutely. Yeah. Parenting skills. Yeah, these are all things that we want to help make them easy and accessible and the easier choice. Yeah, conversations of healthy relationships. So I think that we, like I was saying, you know, we often focus on what are we trying to prevent or what are we trying to heal from, but we don't have as much conversations about how do we identify green flags, right? Everybody knows what a red flag is. Okay. So I'll be sending out a worksheet that kind of creates an opportunity to go through some of these questions that gives you some traction into what it might look like to apply this in your own community or in your own workplace or in your own family or home. And then I'm also, you won't have access to the slides themselves, but you will have access to a key takeaways page, just like a front and back one pager that kind of summarizes what we talked about today. This is my contact information. I try to be as available and supportive as possible. So if you have any questions or, you know, are interested in working with me as a consultant or, you know, you just want to brainstorm, pick my brain, I can be available. Like I said, I have 6 kids. And I'm a mental health provider and I got lots of things going on. So I try to be as responsive as possible, but you might have to give me a few days. My website is on there and my contact information exists there as well. And I just want to tell everyone, thank you for being here. Thank you for taking the time out of your day. Thank you for caring about this, because people like me and my mother and my grandmothers and my sisters and even my father, we need change. I don't want my kids to have to feel the pain that I felt regarding these kinds of experiences that we talked about today and yesterday. And I know you don't either. So with that, I am happy to attempt to answer any questions people have.
Thank you, Whitney. We'll give folks a minute to post any questions. I see a lot of appreciation. So funny, as you were finishing up, I received like
Oh, I
7
can't hear you,
emails from
Chelsea.
folks. Can you say that? Are you still there?
Oh no. Hold
No,
on.
I can hear you.
I can't hear you.
All right. Let's see.
Can you talk again?
Yeah, can you hear me?
I'm so sorry. I can't hear
No,
you. I don't know what to do. Would
That's
you
okay.
like to put it in the chat? Huh, weird. What did we do here?
See here.
Yeah, I can't hear you on my computer or
Alright.
on my phone.
That's okay.
Oh wait, now I can.
Oh, you can hear me now?
I think it's hooked up to my ear hole. I'm gonna put it up to my ear. Okay.
Can you hear?
Hi,
Okay.
I can hear you now.
Awesome. At least the tech stuff happened at the end, right?
Yeah.
Well,
Oh my
I was
goodness.
just saying that while you were finishing up, I received like 7 emails from people saying how this took this trauma-informed scope to the next level. And so just appreciation. There's a lot there's a lot of comments. I've got private messaging. So there's a lot of appreciation and
Thank
thanks
you.
in this space. And I love that we were able to kind of close on a funny note with technical hiccups.
Yeah.
I mean,
It can
once
be a
you're in
heavy
the
topic.
space of learning, yes, once we're in that space of learning, it's good to leave it with humor, right?
Yeah.
So I'm looking at the chat. We have a few minutes. There's a question that says, is there branches of your organization in my state of Arizona?
So so I own my own business, Whitney Nordwald Coaching and Consulting, but I work for Rising Hope Counseling. And we don't have anybody in Arizona at this time, but we are constantly expanding. So that's the practice that I do my individual counseling with, but I do offer some limited trauma-informed coaching for individuals, and then I offer contracted, training, teaching, workshops, that kind of thing.
I'm going to just scroll up. There was so much text happening at once. I just want to make sure I haven't missed a question. All right. It looks like, unless anyone... Oh, asking about NIHB. Oh, okay. So NIHB, we serve 575 federally recognized tribes. We're based out of Washington, D.C., but we have some remote staff across the country. And my email is on the slide show, so if you have questions or you want to follow up about anything from today, feel free to reach out, even if it's a 15-minute get to know you. I love being able to put some faces with names, and I would love the opportunity to learn about it. Awesome. Okay. Well, I want to respect everybody's time, and questions can be directed to me via email. Whitney, thank you so much for the last 2 days. Beautiful space, wonderful content. And for those of you that are on the meeting or maybe missed yesterday, we will follow up with those resources that Whitney mentioned, as well as the 2 recordings, which will be posted on our YouTube channel. So if you are kind of antsy and you want to check out the YouTube, see if it's there before I get to send it out via email, you're welcome to do that. But thank you so much for your time, and we hope to see you at the next webinar.
Yes, thank you. Bye, everybody. Have a great day.